Well, I'm going to introduce somebody who you already know, so it's kind of silly, but I'm just going to pull this book. This is me. My name is Steve Hamilton. I write books, and I love reading books. That's one thing we all have in common, I think. And because I don't have to introduce Bob, just stand there and act natural for I'm going to do something else. I'm going to make a confession, even though Bob is not of the Catholic faith, and I don't think maybe any Catholics here. I think it's all Reformed Church. Like all around. Oh wow, okay. Hey John. I'm going to do a confession if I could. I'm guilty of a couple sins, being a human being and all. And the first one is pride, because I come across as a pretty humble, self-effacing person, but I think I'm a pretty good writer, deep down. So I think that qualifies as pride. I also am guilty of envy. When I pick up a book like this one, and I start reading it, and it's happened a few times in my life, but not that often, because of that pride now. But I'll start reading a book, and I'll just go like, oh my damn it, this guy can write, you know? It's like, could I do that? I'm not sure, you know, it's like just, there's something about good writing, the rhythm of it, the detail, the way it's all, you can tell, I mean, bad writing kind of, you're very aware of it, right? And good writing just sucks you in at this, but at the same time, you know, you're in the hands of somebody who really knows what they're doing. And if it's somebody who's like long gone, you sort of can live with that. Okay, this guy, you know, even if you like Cormac McCarthy, who we just lost recently. Well, he's just an amazing writer, but he just died, and that's okay. So, at least we have the books, you know. But every once in a while, I'll read somebody who is like a contemporary with me, or somebody that I might even get to meet someday, and it's happened a few times. Bill Beverly is a crime writer. Daniel Woodrell, these guys are like, I pick up their books, and it's just like, it just brings up yet a third sin, which is anger. But then when I meet these people in person, like Bill and Daniel and William Kent Kruger, these guys, every single one of them is just like the nicest guy in the world. So I can't be mad at them. I just have to be glad that their books are out there and that they got to share them with everyone else. I was not expecting, honestly, to have that reaction when I picked up Bob's book. Just because the odds against it are pretty great. That's just the way it works. But just the first chapter, I just started reading this, and it's like, wait a minute, this is Bob? Bob wrote this? Seriously, I'm being honest. This is my real reaction. It's like, and I think anyone who hasn't read this yet, everybody here knows Bob, obviously. And in my case, I didn't have to wait to meet him because I've known him for 30 something. Bob did my wedding. Bob married Jill and I. Bob baptized my son. I mean, I've known Bob more than half my life. So I was not expecting to have all those reactions, but it was a great surprise. And if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, you're going to. And I'm just glad that, and I didn't even know that the second book was out.
Yeah.
So that's
just came out.
That's a great surprise today because I get to not pick up the second one. So, and now I guess Bob is going to talk about this book, both of these books. What do you think?
Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming. And I know you all. You know, I mean, this is the wonderful thing. I know you all, just about. Do I know you? No. No, you are? Marcia. Well, nice to have you here. And so what I wanted to do, how's the air conditioning? The air conditioning is pretty good. Beautiful. Good. If it were any warmer, you'd kind of be nodding off. I hope to just describe the 2-volume Apocalypses and what it's about, essentially. Then I want to focus on 2 major characters and their final scene, and one of the final scenes in Volume 2, which occur in Gill's, it's no longer Gill's corn area, But I want you to imagine a cabin which is bigger than a slave cabin, near the corner of Hurley Mountain Road and Winecoop Road, okay? Because that's where the action will take place. So let me just talk about the novel in general. It's called Apocalypses, and essentially what that means is the destruction of the world that's forecast by the biblical writer of Revelation. And we see that because there are two historical strains in the novel. One is 1862, the Battle of Fredericksburg in 1862, in which General Burnside, the Union general, who didn't want to be general, by the way, that's not what he wanted to do after McClellan's disastrous Peninsula campaign, but Lincoln said, you're going to do it. So Burnside assembles 180 cannons, 130, 150,000 troops in Stafford Heights overlooking the village, the city of Fredericksburg, which he's going to bombard. And what he does is he places 3 pontoon bridges, or tries to anyway, across the Rappahannock River so that the troops can go across. What happens is that they do cross, and they are mowed down. There are about 135,000, no, less than that, 85,000 troops under the leadership of Robert E. Lee. You've all heard of him, right? And his great Confederate General Stonewall Jackson. And they will be defending Marye's Heights. What happens is that there's a shelling, a number of shellings on December 11th. And then the initial crew, Union soldiers, will try to cross as the pontoons, which has arrived late, are being stitched together to the other side. Meanwhile, Confederate sharpshooters on Sophia Street, which parallel the Rappahannock, are ready for them. And they are picking off those who try to stitch together the pontoons. They are also, with long-ranged, there were a number of smoothbore muskets which fired about 100 yards accurately, and then there were what's called the rifled musket, which could fire a bullet to about 250 yards. And so what you see then on December 11th, the Union soldiers struggling to get across and establish a beachhead. And once they do, they move up to Sophia Street, and there is fighting. I picture it as a lot of hand-to-hand fighting, a fantasia of legs and arms, because with the smoke that occurs, you can't see much of anything. You can't see your enemy. And so what happens then is that there are major characters on both sides of the battle. One man, a Reverend Vermeulen, comes from New York State. His father was a minister. He enlists because he lost his daughter, 12-year-old daughter, to appendicitis. And he's a lapsed cleric. He doesn't believe in much. And he doesn't have the courage to end his life, but he thinks if he's shot as a patriot, maybe God will have mercy and he'll be translated to heaven, and he will be with the person he loves the most, his 12-year-old daughter. And so he's in it for that reason. Another one in his platoon, Jean, is from France, and he comes because he has a magical talisman, which he believes if it's held up to the sun, the end of the world will come. And he also believes it has certain magical properties so that if you hold on to it, you won't die. And so he says to the platoon, you know, just sing to this or do whatever, and you will not die. So those are two of the major Union characters who are going to cross. On the other side, you have Reverend Nathaniel, who is a street preacher, who is saying the end is coming during the Battle of Fredericksburg. And many people thought it did, or thought it would, rather. And we know that 9,500 troops tried to get to Marye's Heights, and they were mowed down. They were, come on in. Yeah, thank you for coming. they were mowed down. And there was a lot of fighting that took place south on the field which is now called Slaughter Pen Farm. And Lee is up there directing this, Stonewall Jackson is up there directing this. And my novel takes place on December 11th, where they cross the Rappahannock initially, and the fighting ensues there. What I'm interested in, what I'll read, one of the final chapters, concerns a woman, young woman named Corinne, who is 16. Her mother, Charlotte Gleason, is a proper Irish woman who tries to learn to speak with a southern drawl and fails miserably at it. Corinne has a younger brother named Perry who's important to the plot. They're all important. And Corinne is dark-skinned. And her mother tries to lighten it with arsenic wafers, which was common back then. But Corinne sickens. She can't take them. So mother uses a skin cream to lighten the skin, and that also sickens her. And the mother throws up her hands in disgust because her daughter's skin is dark. Well, she's married to an Irishman who finally leaves her, and the novel doesn't say why he leaves her. But the reader will find out that he's not her real father. That there's a slave in Fredericksburg named John, and he's her real father. That she is mixed race. It was called mulatto at the time. And so what I'm going to be reading from is that relationship. Now John is an interesting character, and it's not that I took this from Frederick Douglass, but as a boy living on a plantation in Virginia, John, lived a horrific life. He ate mush from clamshells, and but when he's about 7 years of age, he's taken off the plantation and put in a home in Richmond. And he becomes the son of a white woman, the missus of a plantation owner named Massa Massa, I call him. And the woman is Mrs. Pembroke. She has lost her son. Her son has died of whatever cause, cholera, diphtheria, whatever. And for whatever reason, which the novel doesn't explore, she plucks up this black boy and puts him in her home and makes him her son. The son she's lost is replaced by a black son. And what she does is that she kind of hides her love from him, from her husband, Massa Massa, who doesn't really know the extent of the love she has for this young boy. So they have a summer home out in Gainesville, several miles from Richmond. And she goes out there, and she teaches him how to sing. And he learns to read by reading biographies of Beethoven and Handel. And so, in many ways, he becomes white. At least interiorly, he becomes white. And then, as an adolescent, Massa Massa realizes how much his wife has invested in this boy. And what does he do? The boy is on the auction block. And he's sold to a mill, a tobacco factory in Fredericksburg. And how does he behave? He becomes a slave. Do you know what I'm saying? In other words, he eschews what he's learned. He eschews that background. And he becomes, as his brother says of him, a nigger-licking son. That's what he becomes in order he feels to save himself. So that's where he lives, decade upon decade. Meanwhile, Corinne has some, as a child, she watches slave John, and there is some sort of connection she can't really figure out. She knows there's something here, and what she does at one point is deny it as a child. There's a coon dip. which meant you put a slave who's been recently whipped on a log and you put him in a vat of salted water, and then you take a ball and you throw it, and if you hit him, the log rolls and the slave falls into the salted water. And so what she asks her Irish father, give me a rock so I can hit him with a rock, which she does. And so there is this, and yet she understands that, he will put her, with her mother's permission, on his shoulders. And, when people in Fredericksburg say, what is she doing touching this slave? What is she doing? He will pirouette and he'll say, it's just one dumb horsey. Nothing's wrong with her, And so this is the relationship. After the Battle of Fredericksburg, Slave John saves Corinne and Reverend Vermeulen, who is wounded, who is not translated to heaven to see his dead daughter. And the three of them find shelter in a slave cabin 12 miles south of Fredericksburg in Lost Neck. It's a plantation that is still in existence today, and they are there when Stonewall Jackson was there. Stonewall Jackson celebrated Christmas at Lost Neck. He and his troops were there. Aileen! Oh, good! I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Just recognized you. Forgive me. Don't cut that out. That's okay. So it's the three of them. And he finally reveals to her, not that he's her father, but that he's this well-bred slave from Richmond. And he reveals that to her because Stonewall Jackson has paid a visit. Now that didn't happen, although Stonewall Jackson was there. And he has a knife, Slave John. And he decides that he's going to kill Stonewall Jackson. So he's sticking out his foot and he's saying to Stonewall Jackson, I got big feet and you got big feet too. And Stonewall Jackson, and this is where, what I try to do is the characters I've created, I hope, are not black and white cardboard cutout characters, none of that. Stonewall Jackson bends down and looks at the slave's foot. Because, what Stonewall Jackson is a complicated person. He had slaves, but he taught Sunday school to slaves. And he also had a young girl who was deaf and dumb, and he took her in. And yet he was a killer. He was a killer of Northerners who fought for freedom. So you have this complex character. And you see John wanting to take out the knife and stab Stonewall Jackson. He doesn't get the opportunity. Jackson leaves, and he says, this is who I really am. I'm not some dumb, crappy slave. I am a man of intellect. I am a man of this, and I'm going to kill Stonewall Jackson. So he runs out. Corinne runs after him with a knife in her hand, and she blocks his way. She says, you try to kill him, and I'll kill you. You try to kill Jackson, who is, the apotheosis. It was thought that Stonewall Jackson might be the Messiah, come again. That he might be Jesus Christ or John the Baptist. But he's the savior of the Confederate cause. And, Corinne says, you're not going to get by me. And it reminds her of a game that they used to play when she was a child. That she would faint this way and he would go with her, and then she'd go the other way and she'd follow him. And it reminds her of her childhood and the past that they shared. And it comes to her finally. She begins inchoately to understand that he's her father. So, what happens is that she will come close. He has a knife. She drops hers. He has a knife. He says, don't come further. I'm going to kill you. Don't come further. I'm going to kill you. And she says, no, you're not going to kill me. You're not going to kill me. And so what happens is that she embraces him, and he embraces her tentatively, and He whiffs her hair, which is his hair. She has curly hair. He whiffs her sweat, which is his sweat. But then he casts her off. And finally, he escapes toward freedom. Where does he escape? He heads south to Gaines Mills, to the music house, where he found salvation, where he learned how to read, where he learned how to sing, where he learned a life he would never have. So in many ways, there's a certain application with Frederick Douglass and the life he lived early on. But, what happens then with Slave John is that he will go to Richmond, he will find his sister will box him up in a crate. Because how did slaves escape north? One of the ways they did it, from Richmond anyways, was that they were boxed up in a crate. And they spent 27 hours in that. So this novel, I try to show what it was like to spend 27 hours in a crate. What did you think? How did you defecate? Did you pee? And there was always the fear. There was always the fear of discovery until he gets to Philadelphia. And from Philadelphia, he will take the Mary Powell, the famous Mary Powell steamship up to Rondout, and then he will meet his older brother Samuel, and Samuel occupies this reconstructed home on the corner of Wine Coop and Hurley Mountain Road. And Samuel makes his living. Not only did he heal this white girl of typhoid, which all of the white doctors couldn't do, and that's why he is the recipient of this home, this largesse, but he also barbers, and then he tells fortunes to white women. That's what he does. And so he uses, but he also has this other side to him where he says at one point to his younger brother, doesn't matter who wins the war, we got to kill more of them than they kill us. That's his attitude. And so we see Samuel as a murderer in one case and a possible murderer in another case. And the possible murder takes place behind the Hurley parsonage in the woods there as the banks of the Esopus are overflowing, but I'm not going to do that. So he's living with Samuel. Samuel's going to teach him how to barber. He's going to teach him to tell fortunes, because white women are naturally ipso facto gullible. So you can get away with things, and he has patent medicine that he cooks up, and so what happens is that Corinne finds out where her father, her black father, is living, and she comes up here for two reasons. Hers is revenge too, for another part of this twisted plot. So she has a saltbox gun in her purse. And she also has a watch that will speak to her, because in this novel I try to elevate non-human reality and the value of that, and also non-sentient reality, rocks and cliffs and streams and everything. Because as a Christian, when you look at the book of Job, what is God, how is Job healed? Job is healed because he goes into the wilderness to see animals which are non-instrumental to human health, and then God shows Job rocks and mountains and hail and all of that, and he says, isn't this wonderful? So this watch speaks to Corinne. So apocalypses means a radical reorientation of one's life and one's self, a radical reconstruction or deconstruction of what one thinks about oneself. And with that, I will read a part of the chapter of the Hurley cornfield where Corinne has has found a parable. She seduces Reverend Vermeulen. They're off in Turkey. And she seduces him, not because she loves him, but because she wants to find a parable that fits her finding her father. She wants to stand in the cornfield and to cry out the words of this parable as an act of contrition and forgiveness. She wants her father to come out. She wants to be reunited with the person she loves the most. So I must say that I think the novels take a somewhat of a dim perspective on romantic love, but it takes, I think, a deep perspective on the love that fathers have for daughters. I think that's a theme that my daughter said to me, "Do you know that's in it?" And I said, "No, I didn't write thematically, but now that you mention it." Yeah. So I talked about a murder which may or may not have taken place on the Esopus behind the church. I'm going to skip a little bit of the chapter I'm reading, and hopefully it'll take about, can you bear with me for 15 or 20 minutes? Okay. And then I'll answer any questions. I will sell books. You know, being a minister, it's so hard to market oneself. I mean, it's like pulling damn teeth.
Born in church.
Yeah.
Born in church.
Born in church, yeah. Hey, everybody, Jesus is good, and hey, I have a book here that I want to sell you. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord. Yeah, I should have been one of them street preachers. Hey, I mean, sometimes I felt, I love Jesus, but sometimes I felt like, maybe I could have sold Jesus better. And if that's the case, I can't sell myself for beans, but I thank you all for being here. So let me read. Corinne is in the cornfield now. She clasped the watch. She gazed at the cabin. She readied herself and then completed what her mission called her to do. Corinne cried out, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your slaves." Jay squawked around, by curiosity or offended by this jabber challenging theirs. The sound of chickadees bubbled near the Esopus, and the rapid jit-jit of kinglets warned of an accelerating screech owl. Were they sounding alarm for the residents of the cabin as well? "Father, I have sinned against heaven and you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your slaves," she wailed. Her voice fluttered and cracked. Her throat constricted. She pocketed the timepiece in her vest. She bent down and scratched at a patina of snow glued to ice. Her fingertips stung. A nail broke. She lifted the coal to her lips and gulped more air than water. Above, another flock of geese headed south, their batting, rippling cold toward the earth. Although it relieved the hoarseness, the snow shot through her molars, a good sign. Physical pain was honest and straightforward, unlike interior gyrating. The ache in her jaw meant that she was whole and still indisputably alive. Samuel, this is the older brother, peered out the window, wiping grit from the corners of the pane. "Know her?" he asked. John stooped. Their heads touched, causing both to start. Their breathing misted glass. Samuel swiped the pane again. John opened the door a crack. "To bitch a preacher, a Bible spouter, the last thing we need. Scare away customers." "No customers on Sunday," John reminded. They returned to the kitchen table near the fireplace. Above dwindling flames, 2 pots simmered. "I asked a question, brother. Know her?" "Yes. She's my daughter." John's answer came swiftly. He was not surprised. A life smoothing its way with others, a full-bodied dissembling throughout his existence in Fredericksburg, found honesty refreshing. "Shit," Samuel stood. He gained weight since John's arrival. His forward tilt caused by a new stiffness roosting in his lower back. John watched Samuel's buttocks seesaw as he lumbered back to the window. You whiter than she from the looks. She from Fredericksburg, my guess. Yes. Work for her? For her mother on occasion. Bet you did, he sneered. Overtime and then some. Get rid of her. Samuel's hands searched behind his back until they found each other. Once clasped, they became a fulcrum to straighten himself. He shuffled to the barber's chair, his torso canting despite the effort. He took a deep breath and placed his hands on the top of the chair. His health declined too since John's arrival. John knew he'd be needed to keep his brother's business afloat. He imagined, John did, his future. Soapy water agitated by the barber's brush, the froth, the gleam, a thumb tightening, a cheek below the temple, followed by short, precise scrapes, the detritus rinsed into a metal bowl, and scissors chittering, accompanied by the fixed, almost severe stare of an artist absorbed in his work. Refugee snippets, dismissive of the cape, skittered without purpose like newborn mice on the floor. The good life his older brother offered him. From a shelf, level with a chair, Samuel grabbed a mallet. He returned and let it drop on the table, the rubber head absorbing sound, the wooden handle tapping the surface. Incisions scarred the table, where Samuel had taken a knife to gut fish. The oak soaked up blood. Cleaning rags missed, red tints outlining whorls. During John's stay, the surface grew darker. The edges of the table were V-chiseled, hatchets struck for unknown reasons. Half the table hosted newspaper clippings and letters, filed like fish scales so that one could guess content from headings. You got work. Better were it dark. Don't matter. Take your chances, Samuel said. I won't. Then you leave. Now. Understand? Gotta go. Destroy it. I know, John said. Take your chance. Kill her. Now. Kill it. Now. No. Gotta leave, Samuel repeated. Destroying us. Understand? Destroying the race. The door creaked open wider. A sliver of air entered, rinsing the bitterness of valerian root, brewing along with hops and lemon balm, a mixture turning syrupy which Samuel hoped to market as medicine. In a trash dump south of the Rondout, he chanced on a cache of empty medicine bottles, Lydia Dunham's colic remedy for flatulence and wind colic, which he would sell, noting that a fancy name like Dunham might help vending. He would pass her off as his maternal grandmother, a genius stroke, and one which seemed easier than scrubbing off labels and trying to print new ones. In another pot, mustard greens and pig knuckles simmered. The cabin harbored smoky wisps from a partially blocked flue. The door crack amplified the woman's cry. You can't stay if you walk out that door without the mallet. Then I can't stay, John said. Good. Get out. Samuel paused and wiped his hands on his overalls. His eyes softened and he said, there may be a cabin up on the Eagle's Nest Road. The owner's a friend, maybe a relative. Can stay there for a time. Find out now, he said. Samuel pulled off a topcoat from a rung near the door. How'd she know? She has relatives in Richmond, I believe. Maybe she wrote a letter to Tilly. That's Samuel's sister. Just a guess. Samuel shuffled back to the table and pulled up a chair. His topcoat reeked of hay and manure. Samuel mucked the great barn behind the parsonage. Reverend Lippincott allowed him to stable his horses in exchange for work. Good day horses here. Don't gotta walk. One of the medicine bottles capped with a funnel sat on top of the papers. He removed the funnel and gulped. Alcohol wafted on a burp. Samuel lowered his forehead and it touched the saber. Samuel's head rotated so that his cheek pressed into the wood, scrunching one eye while the other widened, studying his brother. Samuel pushed the mallet toward John, the rubber hitting the slide. John pushed it back. Samuel pushed it forward again. "Needs greasing," Samuel said. John's chin now rested on top of his folded hands. He waited a minute before pushing the mallet toward his brother. "Your move," John said. "You shit at checkers," Samuel replied. "Going up to Eagle's Nest Road." Corinne watched the door open. Samuel avoided looking at her. She observed his lopsided gait. He hitched the carriage to the horses, their tails swatting invisible flies, exhalations crystallizing into dowel shapes. They tossed their heads upward in search of an apple tree, their hindquarters warmed in the meek striped patterns of the setting sun. Corinne observed Samuel's struggle. His belly teetered on the edge of the buckboard, his legs flapping. He heard the grunt as he pulled himself parallel to the seat, a side of his belly overflowing the edge. Somehow he lifted himself to a sitting position. He looked down when he shot a glance in her direction, hoping she hadn't witnessed his trouble. The chimney heated the ground around the house, leaving puddles. Gray mud adhered to the wagon wheels like melted wax. The muck began to peel on the compacted dirt of the main road. Her attention had been diverted. How long had John stood outside the door? It could have been minutes, maybe longer. He looked taller than she remembered. From a distance, she could not read his face. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and you," she cried out. She was cold and scared. The end of the verse dangled silently. He walked toward her, and she thought of running south through the cornfield. There was a pouch in her winter spencer. The fabric enclosed her tightly like a corset, which left the opening seamlessly taut, jailing the watch. Earlier, she placed the watch in her ample coat pocket, forgiving space. Its removal now required effort. Her fingers swelled. Was it fear? She tweezed with squeamish thumb and index finger, fumbling. The watch dropped, straightening the attached chain. She bent and cupped it. When she raised her head, the man was nearly upon her. He was darker than she remembered, or was it twilight's effect? He scared her, as all black men did, although Corinne had known him since childhood, knew she herself was special because of his curious and tender gaze when she thought no one was watching, or when her world was composed of the passerby alone. It was Slave John who sat still, strengthening and emboldening her silently during her childhood, even after the wounding. Then he held her at Moss Neck for a moment after she tried to hurt him there. She expected nothing from him and deserved nothing. She was the prodigal daughter. Maybe forgiveness demanded justice, a price she would willingly pay, although her timepiece pleaded otherwise. She deserved to die at his hands. She who proclaimed the execution of a Mrs. Ayres, if mercy did not apply to the finishing school mistress, it should not apply to her, a conniver and murderer even in her own right, and in the case of a real father, a would-be killer. She knew little about Greek myths, but enough to understand that gods murdered parents. Patricide equalized her crime. Corinne's attempt failed, and a recessed voice rationalized that her nearly lifelong ignorance of their relationship could be exculpatory, could release her from guilt. She praised it was so, although her being could not sustain the lie. She became aware of his embrace slowly, his cheek poised an inch above the crown of her head, his arm constricting her shoulder blades. Did hers hang at her sides, or did she return his hug? She couldn't tell. Earlier that afternoon, she gazed at the flat horizon of hills at the end of the field. They were slate gray, untouched by sunlight, and barely creased by gentle saddles, something solid in the distance from which to orient. Again, Corinne had gone to Turkey following the new Montanus. She remembered her voyage on the ocean, the ship's near roll on a few occasions, the water hissing in horizontal sprays, gritty enough to lick salt from her lips, the suck of water toward the deep, great heaves, carving troughs. its molten consistency playing wildly near the ship, cutting off a greater view of the world, and the hit-and-miss porosity beneath the hull, shaking passengers off their feet. Nearly gravity-free, they zigzagged from wall to wall like hares in a stoppered warren. Now she stood on the earth, bound safely to the firmament. Movement ceased. The earth was as still as it was in the beginning when God rolled back the waters and dry land appeared for the first time, the promised land of decomposing cornstalks and lifeless furrows. Gutted sod, paradise nevertheless. She and her father joined awkwardly like marionettes, a tentative, exploratory hold. Both failed to fully embrace. They were lost to one another, mentally adrift, as they separately contemplated the vast complexity of their joint future. John could not stay. Canada beckoned. During his flight from Moss Neck, he remembered the black man struggling in snowdrifts before the arrival of a symbolic figure slouch hat. Maybe he was that figure, or should have been. Maybe some unseen bounty hunter still pursued, would always pursue him. Strangely, the thought provided comfort. Perhaps he was happiest on the run, unentangled, terrorized more by intimacy than a fugitive's life. Better to vanish than be known. To be known as what? As a nigger with a privileged upbringing for one. As a father for another. When John first spotted Corinne in the field, he thought it was his white mother, Mrs. Pembroke. He hoped it was. For a moment he experienced joy. He became a child once again, racing unbridled toward her, watching her back bend at the hips, her arms wide to receive his hug, her life and his complete as he called out, "Mama." How had he forgotten that detail? Then he pulled out just slightly when he realized the woman before him was not his white mother, but his mulatto daughter, Corinne, little Corinne, with whom he tried to maintain, at least in his own mind, a highly clandestine paternal relationship known only to himself. Something new, startlingly, began to emerge. The love of his white mother transposing to his black daughter, his only child. Perhaps, supernaturally, it was Mrs. Pembroke's final gift to her black son. As he journeyed toward Corinne, he wanted to embrace her, wanted to get it right, yet the thought led to footsteps behind him, closing quickly with feline stealth, the ghost of Massa Massa who had died, racing and aiming a pistol at his back. Once hidden down, the plantation owner would use the same oxide whip. The illusion brought calm, a way of atoning for the love Massa's wife gave the black child, a love which should have been directed toward her husband. He could sympathize with the slave owner's plight, the man's sense of betrayal. He too must have suffered the loss of their real son. In the end, slave John betrayed them both. For some reason, he thought of the music room at Gaines Mills, thought of the mildewed clothing in an upstairs room, thought of Mrs. Pembroke after his departure, tidying her love away. Did she love him more than a daughter ever could? He would only know if he gave himself time with Corinne. He remembered the music room where he saw the back of his mother's sister hunched in concentration, her fingernails ghostly, magnified, reflected in the lacquered wood above the keyboard, the woman hammering away, accompanied by stiffened back flourishes, all to compensate for her inability. The boy knew even then. And yet her incapacity was forgotten in the sanctum of paradise, the music room, especially as he grew and discovered a birthing nib of vibrato, which caused the ceiling and walls to swoon with joy, his home, his only home. During their cobbling embrace, Corinne peered around her father's side. She watched as the carriage wheeled abruptly to the horse's surprise. The carriage ground slowly through the brown gruel back to the hitching post. She heard their nickering, the gentle slurp of equine dreams yet to be realized. The animals lapsed into silence, bowing their heads. The driver Samuel bowed his. A second tableau, anthem, the setting sun. As a disjointed heaven, its depths a lingering sob, its lineaments blurred, extracted itself inching from the darkness. We kept you 45 minutes. Do we have 5 minutes for questions? Or anything you want to ask?
Were any of the characters there are some type in reality that the escaped slave or whatever, and that you borrowed from, or is it all creation of this could have happened?
There was a Henry who was in a box for 27 hours who got to Philadelphia, where Mr. Still owned a halfway house. It was part of the Underground Railroad. But what I do is go a little bit further, and I have Slave John in a large white mansion where he is asked to sing and play, and he refuses to do it. But that's I've read Frederick Douglass, so I'm not sure whether I borrowed something from Frederick Douglass. I had also been to Richmond and had seen the quote White House where Jefferson Davis lived, and so I took from that. But they had a child, I believe, who died, and they had tape measured, the height of the child before he died, and so I think that was playing on my mind. The 2nd century historical narrative, Montanus was a real figure. His two female consorts who comprised a new trinity, and Montanus believed that the end of the world was coming in the 2nd century in the central part of Turkey. He's realistic, that's realistic. What I did was I tried to paint a sympathetic picture of Montanus. In fact, I try to paint a sympathetic picture of nearly everyone. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Excellent.
Yeah. Anything else?
That was magnificent.
Thank you. Reverend Debbie plays Sojourner Truth, and I'm part of the cast. I have a cameo role as a wicked
Very
minister.
ugly minister.
A wicked minister who doesn't want to speak. But maybe I was thinking of our time together, and also there's a scene where Slave John has a nightmare of Pine Street. Pine Street is mentioned in this novel, and I don't know whether you know what Pine Street is, but it was where slaves were dumped almost en masse in that area, and I was there when it was dedicated 2 years ago, I think. And so Slave John has a nightmare about that because his older brother has shown him that, because his older brother wants him to hate white people, and this is the way he's going to, and his older brother says, what happens is that skeletons begin to appear in white people's sump pumps, which was true. Yeah. So, any other questions?
Yeah, this is 2 books.
Yeah. It's longer than War and Peace, I think.
So the same characters in both books.
Yes. You find out, and at the end, again, redemption comes at a price, but there is redemption on a number of levels. It comes at a price.
And there's some closure at the end of the first book.
Yes. Well, the last chapter is violent, and it takes place on West Chestnut Street. So, what you learn is what Kingston was like in the 1860s. Chip's bookstore was opposite the courthouse, for example. There was a Vigne's jewelry store where the talking watch, so to speak, was purchased. There was a dressmaker store where, so that is real. West Chestnut Street, I got into a home and I tried to fashion the home where Lucy Ayres, who undergoes a radical transformation, this prim, proper headmistress in Fredericksburg, yields to a to a man who tries to rape and kill her in Fredericksburg, and they make an alliance. One might say it's an unholy alliance, but Lucy got tired of being prim and proper and doing all the right things, and as a younger woman, she read Poe. And what happens is that they settle on West Chestnut Street, and violence occurs there. It's we talk about redemption and forgiveness, but what you'll see in that second volume is far more radical. Let me say that Kierkegaard once said that Abraham in Genesis 22, God says, "Kill your only son," and Abraham raises the knife, and then God says, "Don't. There's a sheep there." And what Kierkegaard is trying to do is saying that faith transcends our understandings, our traditional understandings of morality. That faith goes beyond morality when Abraham lifts the knife. And what I try to do in this novel in a more positive way is say forgiveness. The radical forgiveness that we see when Lucy Ayres joins with a girl named Nellie, murdered Nellie Dino's mother. It's not even forgiveness. It's something we can't comprehend, but it's good and it's right. So
Very timely book.
that's what. Who was it? Yeah, Bill Nueves. I asked him, could he do it this afternoon, and I just asked him this morning because I just thought of it, and he was kind enough to be here and do this. But Bill said that. He said, I'm reading this novel, and it's really timely now. And it took me 3 years to write it, and the first volume was published, I think, in February, and the second volume was just published 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I'm glad. I didn't write thematically. I wrote characters and I wrote plot. But now, as my daughter says, yeah, but there are other things. There are themes here. So I have to look at that and reread it. Any other questions?
What's your writing discipline? Do you write like every day, or do you write as the spirit moves you?
I was to finish this. I was writing every day. Sometimes, I was talking to Steve, who writes every day now. And, toward the end, I was writing 8 hours a day in 2-hour blocks. And all I did was, I'm single, which helps. I don't have a missus saying, what are you doing more of that now? What are you doing? Get off that computer, please. I didn't have that at all, So, but I worked out and I just wrote, and I did a lot. I did a lot of editing then. And my problem now is that I'm working on another novel, but it's. I share this with Steve. It's going to be set in Peru in the late Spanish colonial era, and it will be historical fiction suspense. It will be 1 volume, and I'm going to Peru in November just to explore Machu Picchu and Cusco, which was the heart of the Inca Empire. So I have it, but I'm not writing, and that worries me a great deal. That but there's nothing I can do. I have to try to. As painful as it is, and it is, to market on myself. And what I mean by marketing is simply to try to get the word out. And Steve has been so kind to me, in that regard. I'm a struggling old writer, not a struggling young man. So, any other questions? Thank you so much. I have books for sale, but thank you so much for coming. And it's under an hour, just like my, when I preach on Sunday and everything, it's usually under an hour. Don't laugh, Wally. Don't laugh. Thank you so much, and it's Marcia. Yeah, good to meet you, and I know, is that your daughter?
This is Tegan.
I can't believe it, I didn't recognize you. Yeah, so good to see you. Tegan, yeah, my goodness. It's funny, when you're a minister and you leave a congregation, it's like everyone is in amber. You remember them as they were. And then you say, who the heck are you anyway? The sad thing is when they look at you and say, who the heck are you? Thank you so much for coming.